The quarters were kind of unpredictable. Nobody was really understanding why something was in the pipeline, why it might close versus, close won versus close lost. They're selling on demo. What I mean by that is they get on the demo and they point and they click and all that stuff, but they're not really making a connection as to why. And so we took a really hard look at what is our ICP, what is our sales pitch, and why, focusing in on qualification. That made us a lot more attractive. We increased win rates from about 25% to over 50%.
And that was all just from focusing on your ICP, on your sales process.
Yeah, it was a dramatic increase, and that will get you a lot of growth. But if you can't change the inbound pipeline, if you don't have the growth marketing, it's going to be difficult to grow beyond, say, 20, 30%.
Welcome to Go-to-Market Science, the podcast for CROs and revenue leaders scaling mature B2B companies. There's an art and there's a science to go-to-market, and we're obsessed with the science. In this podcast, we share tangible, actionable playbooks from the trenches, from what we're learning working as go-to-market strategy and RevOps consultants for our clients here at Union Square Consulting, and candid conversations with revenue leaders in the market that have been there. If this podcast delivers value, we'd love a 5-star rating and a follow. Now let's get into it.
Welcome back to another CRO Stories segment. I'm your host, Rachel Buchert, and with me today is Anthony D'Angelo, the former CRO at Unifi. And Anthony has a really rare expertise, I think. He is a channel sales / partnerships specialist with over 20 years of experience building and scaling channel sales organizations. And that includes stuff like Viptela's $610 million exit to Cisco, helping scale Cato Networks to unicorn status, and more recently founding his own firm, Channel 360. Thank you so much for joining me, Anthony.
Great to be here.
And I hope I pronounced your last name right. D'Angelo?
You did. It was absolutely perfect. That apostrophe really is the bane of my existence. You try to check into a hotel with an apostrophe, it's difficult.
Oh, I bet. So, Anthony, why channel sales? What got you into it, and what's made you stay focused on it for so long?
It's interesting. Luck, really. I think, a lot of times, that's kind of how, some of our careers, start out. Interestingly, my very first job out of college was helping somebody start a surf company. They wanted to sell just not within the city that they were in, but they wanted to sell all over the world, and not knowing anything about channel sales. That's essentially what it was. It was establishing distributors and shops up and down the East and West Coast. And it was only when I was interviewing later on that I made the connection that was it. But, I started off as a sales rep at a small consulting firm. And this is when the channel was really kind of, coming alive and becoming a core go-to-market. And I started off selling that and working with different vendors as their outlet to getting closer to customers. From there, I took a role as a channel manager at a vendor. And then it took on increasingly, larger roles within that, all technology. This was when Checkpoint software first started out, and it was sort of new, but sort of by luck. But I really, really enjoyed what I was doing, and I saw that I could have fun with it and exercise a lot of different muscles. And that's still one of the things I really, really enjoy about it. It's a little bit of sales, it's a little bit of marketing, it's a little bit of operations, and then you throw in relationships to boot. It's a great spot to be. And I wish I could say I designed, my resume around that, but it just kind of happened by accident. But it was a great accident.
That's awesome. Yeah, I have a very similar story, just happy accidents and domino effects all around.
That's right. Yes.
Yeah, and channel sales is super interesting to me because, like I said earlier, I've only really heard about it in the last few hours before this podcast, and I was like looking up what it was. And I should have known what it was because here at USC, we kind of do a similar thing. We do have like partners and partnerships with VCs and PE firms. So I think it's like super interesting, and I think a lot of maybe potentially missed potential happening with CROs who don't really think about it too often.
It's a great point. And it's one of those things that you know of it. You see it all around you. Maybe you don't call it channel sales, but it's the same reason Sony sells their TVs, or they used to sell through Best Buy and outlets like that. Now it's going to be Amazon. It's really around getting closer to the customer and being and selling to them kind of where they exist, and then keeping them happy. And that's tough to do as a large company with, a few folks that may not be right around the block. So you kind of get why it's important. And I think, when I first started, it was very much around relationships and just taking people to lunch. And my managers at the time, when I was, in my 20s, that was kind of how they ran the business. They just built relationships, and people buy from people that they know. But that only gets you so far. And I think, once you start seeing the value of it in terms of how you grow your business, it starts to become an inevitability. And you're seeing it more and more with Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud, and everyone's trying to kind of, increase their range, get closer to the customer, and sell more.
So what was the shift like for you going from a specialized channel sales role, or several specialized channel sales roles in the past, to a CRO role where you're overseeing all of revenue?
So, I talk about it like this. When I first started out, I mentioned kind of the relationship aspect of it, which is still important. No matter what we're doing, obviously relationships are important, but it was too much around that. So my first kind of channel manager roles, I was making money, and people said, you're on plan or you're over plan, you're doing great, but I couldn't really tie what I was doing to those results. And that really frustrated me. And so, my approach was very much around running the business like a CRO would. I didn't know it at the time, but I wanted hard metrics. I wanted attribution. I wanted to be able to say, this is my strategy and why. Here are the things that we're going to do about it, and then reflect on those results, both leading and lagging, and say, are we doing a good job or not? And so I ran my teams and like a direct sales team, like a revenue team, combining marketing with sales and operations, and really holding to what are we contributing to the organization and why is it successful, and then iterating from there. So it was really born out of a frustration, which I just wanted to know if I was really doing a good job. But it's one of the reasons why I've really liked it. In some ways it's sort of ignored, or it was ignored by the business. And so you got to do a lot of things on your own. But I think it's why, as I grew in my career, I was able to find connections and alignment and relationships with folks that really were revenue focused. A CRO at the time liked my perspective because I was looking at it as, kind of a mini CRO, if you will. And so I think from that, kind of born out of that, I really wanted that. And I wanted to know if I was doing a good job, and started attacking it that way. I wish I could say I sketched it all out, but that's kind of how it happened. And then I think, since I was running large teams at some point, sometimes small, sometimes large, taking that and then, tackling, direct sales teams where the channel was a part of it, just was kind of a natural, extension of that.
Mm-hmm. And so did you see, like, how did you get into Unifier as a CRO? Did they reach out to you, or did you see the CRO role pop open? You're like, hey, that's actually more in line with what I want to do.
So it was great because, with Unifier in particular, I was their customer. So, in my roles, prior to that, at least a lot of them, I had evaluated pretty much everything that was on the market. I'd implemented many of them, including Unifier. It was called Zift at the time. But I had used it, and I could talk to other, channel chiefs or, channel sales leaders around not just what it was. And it was basically a tool to help you manage and execute across, your channel, across your partners. I could talk to them as a customer, somebody that used it. So it actually started, I was referring business to them. I was, already doing some consulting. I was, I wanted a change. I was a little burned out. I didn't want the same exact role. And I had some flexibility after a few exits. And I thought, well, let's just try something different. And in doing so, I was referring a lot of business to them. And the CRO at the time and the CEO said, why don't you come work here? So it kind of started off almost like a fractional role. And then we found that we had a good alignment, and that I understood the business, and I really enjoyed it. And so it was a great run because of a lot of those elements. It just was a perfect fit.
They must have obviously probably already had channel sales going in the organization before you came on as a CRO.
They did. More importantly, they were selling to people who were running channel sales organizations. So the product itself, it was a SaaS product, really around your go-to-market management of your partners, helping them get educated and tracking attribution of deals, integrating with Salesforce, for example, within your CRM. So they were selling to channel sales leaders, and so it was a really natural, fit. It gave me the opportunity to kind of test my mettle a little bit. You think, oh, I can do this, but you don't really know sometimes before you take those leaps. But it seemed like a really good fit because I understand the customer. So the channel sales expertise, understanding the customer and speaking to them, really, really helped. But also, to your point, they also wanted to kind of build out an element of their go-to-market, through a channel. So that also gave me, a good foundation for helping them do that.
Yeah, I bet it's easier to work with a company that's already bought into, the thing that you're specialized in, and there isn't a lot of pushback there.
That's right. Yeah. And what was interesting about it, and I think this is maybe a good spot, for one of those roles, particularly if you're kind of making a transition. It wasn't really a vertically focused, kind of solution. It was more horizontal. It was kind of a shared problem. So whether you were technology or maybe just manufacturing, if you sold through, a channel of individual partners, whatever those might look like, this was a product that worked for you. And so it was a really great fit. I don't want to say a low bar. It wasn't easy, but a lower bar in that, and it really gave me the opportunity to breathe some life into what they've been doing. They've been around for a long time, and start running the revenue teams, the go-to-market teams, in a slightly different way.
So what was one of your biggest challenges or accomplishments as a CRO at Unifier, specifically around process, operations, strategy, and all that?
It was almost exclusively like that. I mean, when I first started, and I think this is really common, whether companies are early stage or even companies that have been around for a long time, but they've kind of been hovering, let's say around 10 or 15 million. And there's a lot of companies that are like that. I see them every single day. So it doesn't have to be a pure startup, but they share similar things. And one of those things that they tend to share is they've been doing things kind of the same way for a long time, and managers weren't really developed. They just kind of got promoted, and things work, but they just kind of never really grow. And so I look at those barriers really to success, not so much challenges. It's usually not when somebody's doing something wrong, although sometimes that happens. It's just they just haven't adjusted around them. So that was the case with Unifier. The team had been around for a long time. They'd been selling the same way. And so very quickly, we took a really hard look at how many sales reps do we have versus how many do we need, and looking in that utilization. It's interesting, some of those fundamentals and basics that we might take for granted and maybe we talk about all the time, but when you're running a business, you don't always get the chance to kind of stop and quantify that while you're trying to survive, really, right? So, really taking a look at some of those fundamentals. All very common with companies in this range is they're selling on demo. What I mean by that is they get on the demo and they point and they click and all that stuff, but they're not really making a connection as to why. And so we took a really hard look at everything from what is our ICP, really the basics, carve out everybody that we're just not being successful with, really took a hard look at what is our sales pitch and why, really to make that a lot more customer focused, focusing in on qualification. Again, these are basics and they seem so simple, but what's really important to me, and it may be because, I just kind of came up, on luck, I think a little bit, is that never get tired of the basics, right? There's no matter what you're doing, they're so fundamental. Knowing who you're selling to, qualifying them before you demo, or at least, you know, first. It could be on the same call, but really customizing that demo versus just more scattershot. And there was a lot of that. So it was really bringing execution elements into it. Really, really basic, nothing magical, nothing super smart. It was just, making sure we cut out the stuff that we just, weren't going to be successful at. We really refined the execution, making sure that we qualified really, really well, and that our sales pitch was around the why, was around the impact of what we bring versus just assuming the customer knew they were buying something. That made us a lot more attractive. One of my team fundamentals really is around, we talk about differentiation. There's product differentiation, but the sales team itself needs to create its own differentiation, and that's really where we focused as a team, making sure that we set ourselves apart, that we truly were kind of consultative sales, and that we were helping them understand why, and being honest, hey, maybe we're not the right fit. So, I was really, really proud of the work that we did. We reduced the overall customer acquisition costs dramatically. We sold more with less people. Unfortunately, when I got there, they were kind of overweighted. But we sold more with fewer people just by discipline, execution of those fundamentals. And so we increased our sales, dramatically 2 and 3x, depending on the quarter, reduced the customer acquisition cost by really evaluating the team and figuring out what we needed, aligning it to the pipeline and stuff like that. So, that was, a lot of fun. And the team there is just fantastic. They're all really focused on the customer. And so, we aligned all of that weight squarely towards the customer, and there really wasn't this team, that team, the other team. It was one kind of go-to-market organization, which was really cool, but really focused on the people.
Yeah, those are some really great results also. And that was all just from focusing on your ICP, on your, your SLAs, response times, sales process.
Yeah. To a large degree. So, I mean, the quarters were kind of unpredictable. This happens very, very often, right? And you talk to people all the time, and I'm sure they bring this up, because nobody was really understanding, why something was in the pipeline and why it might, close versus, close won versus close lost. And so, refining all of it from start to finish. So yes, it was the ICP, really redefining the qualification process. What are we trying to understand? What are we trying to articulate? Establishing with the sales team that our primary goal, particularly early in the process, is to shape the lens that our customers are looking through. We happen to have a customer set that didn't buy software all that much. They needed help. So, we wanted to be able to kind of help them, but refining the stages and what they meant. What is entry criteria to a stage? What is exit criteria? Simplification of all of those things, and then adherence and discipline to them. All of those things really start to make it more predictable. So if you say, hey, we're going to do $1 million this quarter, you're going to be pretty close to that. And making sure that you can, also update the business. This was a time where private equity was kind of investing in this space across pretty much everybody. And that brought, kind of newer requests to understand the business as well. So there's so much growth in discipline and execution and really simple basics. I repeat it all the time, but there's 20 to 30% growth no matter where you go if you just do those things.
Yeah. And I feel like we're almost a broken record repeating that stuff all the time too, because it's a big foundation of our content is like, here are the basics. You got to make sure you do all the stuff. You have to make sure that you know your ICP, like really know your ICP, not just, oh, well, we sold to these people the last year, so I think that's our ICP. It's like, well, you're missing the people that you lost because you didn't have the right messaging, but maybe those guys were actually your best customers. And just really trying to drill that into people because, I mean, that's our business. It's what we help people do, right? So what were like the biggest challenges that you faced trying to figure all of this stuff out? Like, did it take a lot of time or why was it difficult?
You know, barriers that that existed within the organization that exist across most companies that at that stage. Economic barriers, probably the biggest one, and you probably hear that all the time. The front end stuff was pretty easy. I had a plan. I've got a playbook built around these basics. I kind of knew, and I had the luxury of being that customer. So I could come in as an expert, and you often don't get that luxury. So that part was easy. I think getting alignment around, the ICP and some of those basics don't just apply to revenue teams. It's everything across the go-to-market, from product to go-to-market to customer success. So driving that alignment, that takes a little bit of work. We'd all love to just say something and everyone go, oh, great. Yeah, that makes total sense. You do have to bring people along for the ride. But it was a really strong team, and we got that alignment pretty quickly. I think one of the biggest challenges there, and I think this is a common challenge, is, on the marketing front, we increased win rates from about 25% to over 50%. It was a dramatic increase, and that will get you a lot of growth. But if you can't change the sales pipeline, the inbound amounts, so you prove out first, you can win what's in front of you. That was where we started. And then you say, okay, if we get 100 at bats, we're going to win at least 50 of them consistently. And some of those rates were even higher than 50%. I was really proud of them. But if you can't change the inbound pipeline, if you don't have the growth marketing, if you don't have alignment there and you're not making those investments, it's going to be difficult to grow beyond, say, 20, 30%. And that was probably the biggest challenge. And I think that's a consistent challenge across lots of companies that aren't Cisco or aren't Hewlett Packard, but maybe even there too.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's a pretty huge increase in win rates. Wow.
I was really, really proud of the team. I mean, it's surprising, and I believe it's repeatable. I think it's not because these are it's not me. It's not because they're magic ideas. It really is because these fundamentals work. And if you get bored of those fundamentals, you won't enjoy the job, and you'll be off in other directions. And I think now that even with AI, boy, if you don't have your fundamentals down, AI is just going to scale your noise instead of really kind of scaling your results.
Absolutely. So after you guys saw all this amazing success with nailing the fundamentals, where did you go from there? And how did you amplify that even more?
Yeah. So, the challenge then became, how do we scale this? And so certainly making investments from a partner perspective, a sales channel, was one of the ways that we did that. All channels are kind of different. They're different at stage of company, and they're different at type of company. It's not always that your channel is bringing in sales pipeline, let's just say, which is what most people want. In many cases, it's just amplifying your message, and it's cross marketing, and those things become a much bigger, they have a much bigger impact now as people are doing more research before even talking to you as a sales rep or a sales team or engaging with your website directly. That cross promotion and really amplifying that is really what the channel there did. And we brought on some folks that were, experts in that and started building out some of those relationships. So that was one thing that we definitely did. And then you start looking at, customer advocacy. And it's all kind of the same, it's the same stretch of go to market. You get the first things done first, and eventually, how are you utilizing your customers to advocate for yourself, to keep that, that cycle going. And it really is around the systems and the machinery, and making sure that you have an engine that's always working for you.
Yeah. And can you go into a little bit more detail about that? How do you strategize that and build those programs?
So let's start with with the partnerships first, really kind of understanding, which elements, are really impacting your customers. And what we learned really, or at least validated, was that our customers that we were trying to sell to, weren't just buying, this product, this solution, this software as a service. They were also leveraging consultants and marketing agencies and things like that. And so, focusing on that was a big part of it. And again, I think the mistake we could have made is expecting those consultants to just hand us deal, oh, we sold this for you. Here it is, which, when that works, it's great. But what they really were doing was informing and helping develop the overall channel sales strategies of our customers. And one element of that is, what's the software solution that you're using to execute? And so we had these connections, we found the right partners, and focused on, building those relationships, around the right context. Had we gone to them and said, you got to give us 50 deals a year or something like that, that's not their business, right? They don't even if I gave them a referral fee, they don't care. They have a core business. But there was a synergy. They were able to kind of amplify, give us insights into certain customers. They definitely refer business as well. But it's not as direct as, we sold it for you. They'll just say, hey, look, this person's looking at this. We talked to them, about you. And then you can kind of strategize together. But there are, a few, where they're actually referring business as kind of part of their go-to-market as well. But it's not the majority of it.
Mm-hmm. So I'm also curious about how you build these programs kind of in general, going back to talking about the fundamentals and like figuring out who your ICP is and figuring out the sales process. How is that different from, figuring out your direct sales ICP or your direct sales process?
It's not as different as you think. And I think one of the barriers or challenges or the things that limit, a lot of companies from being successful is treating them different. And I think, for me, I don't think I always knew this, but I think I kind of attacked it that way. We talked about, I tried to run the team like a direct revenue team, because at the end of the day, the goal of your channel is to get closer to your customers, is to, meet them where they're at, and they have to be able to sell on your behalf. Ideally, at the very least, they need to be able to identify an opportunity and present that to you in some way. Sometimes they resell and they package it around, their own services. And sometimes they refer it. And then sometimes now that you've got Amazon Web Services and Google Cloud, and you're just buying through this marketplace. But recognizing that it's not all that different, I think, is the key. Certainly from my perspective. And the reality is that when the company treats their sales channel as their team versus some other thing, you start making commitments to that team, right? You can't have a successful sales team without educating them, without training them, without enabling them, and without rewarding them in the right way. If you treat them like just some other thing, and you only like them when they sell, and you're not really helping them do so, you're going to fail. So making sure that you had that commitment from the top, and you saw it as an extension of your team. Truly, there's nuance there. I mean, they're not, but you have to treat them that way. They will sell not just because they like you. They'll sell what they know, and they'll sell what's going and keep their customer happy. And at the end of the day, if you can't make that connection and enable them in the right way, in a smart way, and then reward them in a way that makes sense for their business, if you're not doing that, you're not going to be successful no matter what you do. There's nuances by stage as well, but at a very, very high level, it is a revenue team. And if you don't treat it that way, it's really, really difficult to be successful.
Mm-hmm. And how do you own those metrics and, that opportunity to give feedback and coach these sales teams when they're not technically your sales team? Are there times where it feels like you're kind of overstepping on that other company?
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, within the organization itself, and quite frankly, since I kind of came up as a channel manager, I experienced this. The channel team, particularly early on, was kind of the stepchild of the organization, and they were kind of looked down upon, and I didn't like that. I wanted to kind of elevate not just me but the team and what we were doing. And so there is that conflict. And the conflict early on came because the revenue teams, the direct sales teams, had the most credibility. And this other thing was kind of just an other thing. And I think over time, and I think the data will show, and I think there's probably good, metrics out there to basically say, 70 to 80% of kind of technical or technology commerce is going through a sales channel. It's something that you can't ignore. And there's still remnants of, I don't really understand it and I don't like it, and they're just taking people to lunch. And stuff like that. But it's really incumbent on the channel sales leaders to start adopting, more of a CRO mentality in order to be successful. It's kind of like moving from relationship management to revenue management, and that, pure luck. But my career kind of, went across that arc just from pure timing. But I think, revenue leaders really need to look at that and not treat it, separately, and give it the attention. There's definitely strategies, but it starts with that shared, I don't even want to say alignment, but shared understanding of what this is. This is the difference between you growing into a new market, expanding internationally, and hitting your sales numbers. You just can't do it with the sales team that you have.
Absolutely. So what would be your advice to a CRO or a revenue leader listening to this right now? And maybe they haven't really thought of channel sales before. Maybe they have like their toes dipped in the channel sales pool, but they don't really know what to do next or how to really scale it and make it meaningful.
Certainly seek advice. I mean, there's folks that have done this before, we all are constantly learning, and we want to, learn from, different companies and the like. But the first thing is you got to commit to it. You definitely have to bring in the right talent for sure that you align to, that is really treating it, and make a distinction between somebody that is more a little bit, relationship versus hardcore metrics, leading and lagging and really driving it. But that commitment is the very, very first step. And then, because talent and the team is really one of the core pillars, making sure that you hire folks that are trusted within the sales channel that you're trying to go after, that they understand it, and most importantly, that they're aligned with the revenue function, right? Bringing in pipeline, closing deals. And when it's done right, it's pretty consistently a shorter sales cycle, a higher win rate. All the metrics that you really look for tend to be higher when you're selling through the channel, when you're executing, well. So, but the starting point is really, really committing to it and believing in it, and not, letting it be a second class kind of part of the, the organization.
Mm-hmm. On that topic, how much more does your channel sales team or department sell than the direct sales typically?
So it works best when the teams can co-sell, right? So, one of the challenges that leads to some of this conflict is, well, how do you compensate all these people, right? If you are, if you have a direct sales team that's, getting paid more per deal by ignoring a partner, well, they're not going to bring one in, right? Like, so you might get lucky and somebody believes in it that much, but if you're talking about their money, it's going to be, a little difficult. And so, when I talk about commitment to it and really understanding it, making sure that that is driven down through your organization such that, compensation wise, teams are incentivized to work with partners versus, disincentivized, and that you kind of remove some of that conflict. The easiest way to do that is to say we are all channel, that we are only exclusively, going to sell through the channel. Oftentimes companies will say, well, we'll channel first, we're channel forward. But what that means usually is we'll do it when it's convenient. But we don't want to give away too much margin. But, when you build that from the get-go and it becomes just part of the organization, that's when things really start working. So, in some cases, the channel team's job is to educate direct sales teams on how to sell. But over time, there's not a this or that. It's just part of the technology go to market. It becomes so endemic that, the conflict reduces, and that's a big piece of it, is reducing conflict. But making sure that your comp plans are aligned to it, your quotas are aligned to it, your enablement is aligned to it, such that you don't really have so many different organizations. It's usually not perfectly like that, but the more it is like that, it's no longer a conversation. It's just kind of how things are. And that takes a very strong channel leader, I think, very go-to-market focused channel leader to drive that and bring people along, justify it, and then prove it out. It's now a board level conversation. What is our channel bringing to us? Are they bringing pipeline? Are they closing more deals? So, now the CFO is saying, do I want to invest in this or do I want to invest in more sales reps? And when it's working, I think it would be almost, I can't even imagine a scenario where if you wanted to double in size, that you would just double your sales force, right? You would spend so much more doing that. But you're also running a business, so you have to have some control. And so having a little bit of both is needed. It's just getting it to work in a frictionless way. That's the trick.
Quick pause. If you're getting value from this episode, I want to ask you a small favor. Take 30 seconds right now, open up the app you're listening to this on, and give us a 5-star rating. It sounds small, but it's the single biggest thing you can do to help us get conversations like this in front of more revenue leaders. While you're there, hit follow so you never miss an episode. Okay, let's get back into it.
How would you have, let's say a company is, they have both. They've got the channel sales and direct sales, and maybe they're trying to transition to more channel focused. But how do they balance the two and make sure the relationship between the two doesn't have conflict?
So it's a great question too, because I think a lot of companies are really kind of facing this. And in many cases, they kind of dip their toes in the water. So they have these teams and they haven't quite integrated them. So it's a few things. Again, I think from my perspective, committing to be 100% channel is a great place to start, because now you're thinking about the organization and everything in it through that lens. You still have strategic accounts. You still have your sales team's always going to be the best sales team. It is very rare that a channel partner of any size, unless you're a Cisco and you've got somebody that's selling billions of dollars in software, they're not ever really going to be as good as your sales team. But making sure that you are, integrating that go-to-market, that there isn't a choice. You give somebody a choice, you could take this direct and avoid any other person in your deal. For a salesperson, it's painful to bring somebody else into your deal.
Yeah.
Even from your own company, you don't want to do it. And so, making that easy and getting that to be habit and just part of your engine is so important. So aligning the comp plans, and treating the go-to-market and your enablement, and everything that you do to arm your sales force. You need to be doing that across everything, and with the channel, in mind. And the more that becomes just natural and just fun and really part of it, that's when things, really start working. It's reducing friction in any way that you can, and compensation is the number one way to do that. You remove that, and it may not be great in the first month, but a year later, you're going to forget that you even had kind of a bifurcated kind of go to market that way.
Mm-hmm. I imagine this is one of the really big barriers to success here for channel organization or channel sales teams. So you mentioned compensation. What would be like the number 2 and number 3 ways to make sure it's seamless? Maybe are there certain processes that need to be in place?
For sure. I think the number one thing is really around enablement. I think, from a CEO's perspective, or even a CRO's perspective, if they haven't really been in a company that was successful that way, they're doubting. They know their team. These other people, they're not so sure about, right? And so really, in the same way that you have to enable your own sales team, you have to enable your channel partners. And very similar to your own team, it's constant, right? You're never done. So, building that and prioritizing that. And the reality is, it's everything that you train your sales team to do. You point that towards your partners with a little bit of kind of extra nuance, and recognizing that this isn't the only thing they sell, right? They don't want to bring some random thing into a customer that is 10% of their overall revenue, and they've been a customer for, 10 years, and bring them something that doesn't work. And so there's other things that you have to reinforce, but it's so similar. It's not that different from kind of building and enabling a team to understand how to position it, how to sell it, how to deal with, with pushback and overcome that. Plus, how do you position this with your services and with other things that might be, complementary, other technologies and things like that. But that enablement is really, really important, and you have to be committed to it. And it can't be a side gig.
And so I imagine you have so much experience like building these different partner programs. What was a time where one just kind of fell on its face and it didn't really work out well, or there were huge, huge challenges and obstacles? And what changes did you have to make?
Yeah. So look, it's so similar. Like, these themes are so consistent. It's, when you over prioritize the program, I mean, the program really is, I've learned, I didn't know this, but the program really is just an extension of your overall strategy, right? It's a thing. And it can be, it can be an extension. It could be a rewards mechanism. But it's just a program, right? It's just something that you can document. If you sell this, you get this percent, and incentives and things like that. I think where I saw very specific, challenges is overcomplicating it, trying to accommodate for too many things, where you read it and go, I don't even know what this means. And so, I think that's the biggest thing, when they're overcomplicated. And I saw that early in my, in my career. Even when I was at, one of the first kind of large roles I had was at RSA Security. And, they were big enough that you tend to have things that are overcomplicated. You over-engineer, there's too many cooks in the kitchen and things like that. And it's not that they did anything bad. But as somebody that was taking that and talking to, partners, you saw very, very quickly, it's overcomplicated. It doesn't make any sense. And what it really says, and this is the real challenge, and this is the real barrier, is I wrote all of this to meet my needs, the vendor's needs. And that was the biggest problem. And we kind of touched upon it. I may not have even said it that clearly, but it's so common that people just, companies just say, well, I just want the revenue, just give me the pipeline. and then, the customer needs a price concession and you're like, well, you have to eat it, that kind of thing. It's a very selfish view, super consistent, and very common, particularly, over the last decade or so, but it's selfish and it doesn't work. So I saw that pretty quickly. It was overcomplicated. And the partner just went, well, you wrote this for you. You know what I mean? I see why you like it, because you don't have to give anything. There's no risk on your side. We're taking all the risk. And so, that was a huge challenge, and really pushing that perspective, and bringing some partners together and getting the right people in a room to have them hear. It's just like any other customer. This is a customer of yours. And so, you walk through that and you try to explain why. And managing up is very, very much around, not just kind of alignment, not just agreement, but a real shared understanding. Let me explain why this doesn't work and why it comes across as selfish. But that happened more than once, and it's something I fought very early in my career. I think it's starting to become a little less common.
Yeah. And so how do you, nip that in the bud when you start to see it come up?
You have to get the decision makers, in a room. There's just no other way to be able to do it. Particularly if it's not their forte, if it's not their experience, if they don't have that background, you almost understand why people kind of, will write a program that very clearly, favors them and de-risks their business, but not the channel that you're trying to attract and build relationships with. So you really have to sit down and explain the why, and get that shared understanding. And it definitely helps to get them in a controlled environment, in front of those partners, those customers. So, I think I spent a good portion of my early career almost as a mediator. You get the language of the partner and the language of the vendor, and helping everybody communicate is a big part of it. Because, you don't always have the exact same, kind of shared experience. So it's the only way to kind of do it. And then you get input from those partners, and you start to, build out a program that makes sense, with the understanding of why it works and why it will work. And then you measure it and you iterate, just like you do anything else.
Well, I wanted to change gears a little bit here and ask you a bit about Channel 360. So you recently founded this, or I saw you founded it in 2022, but now you're doing it full time more recently. So what inspired you to start Channel 360?
So, look, to be honest with you, I was a little burned out, right? Or more importantly, I wanted a change. I didn't want to go. I'd been a channel chief in a few different organizations, and I wanted to try something different, but not totally different. And I thought, okay, I'd spoken with a lot of companies. Most of the time it was some sort of a recruiting element. Hey, we're looking at hiring this. And in my conversations with them, I basically said, it's too early. Like, you don't want to hire somebody yet. You don't know what you need. And I saw so many times people would hire the wrong person. They'd pay way too much, and it would just turn over really, really fast. And I thought, okay, well, it's a hard position to take. I had the luxury of being able to say, all right, don't hire me. Don't put me in that role. Let's do something that's, economical, that de-risks your business, that doesn't tie you into something, but will get you moving immediately and help you understand what you need long-term. And it just seemed like a really, really good fit. And the second piece was I like a little bit of chaos. So it wasn't by design, but I end up being in a lot of companies at a chaos stage. In my resume, almost none of those companies exist. I went through lots of acquisitions and mergers and things like that. And I liked that chaos. So what I thought was a good opportunity was not to be a consultant, because I very much like to be embedded. I want to be in the deals because that's how I learn, and that's how I can kind of help, shape. I don't do it at an arm's length. And I thought, pure consulting, wasn't my strength. And so where I thought I'd be of most use is get me in there. I will treat this as if it's my number one priority, and I am the CRO, but you, as the business, don't have to make that full commitment. And I gave me the opportunity to tackle challenges that I really was excited to tackle. And again, the barriers to growth and the barriers to scale, particularly 0 to say 25 million in particular, they're so similar. If you're comfortable in that space, and you like tackling those things, it's a great place to be. And so, I talk to a lot of companies that are founder led, product led. They haven't been able to make the investment and go to market. And I help them get started on that path, and then help them, find other people that will help them. And oftentimes, kind of move on. And in the end, they get exactly what they need. They educate their teams, and they make better business decisions on who now to invest in. So I find it to be really, kind of exciting. Sometimes I worry there's something wrong, that I really do enjoy the chaos. And the more chaos there is, the more I just want to wrap my arms around it and kind of get it into a controlled way, and see where it goes from there.
I love that. I think that's a prerequisite for most CROs in my mind.
Yeah, well, I definitely think it is. It's interesting. I'm not an extrovert. Oftentimes you kind of think of salespeople, and but you adapt and you learn those kind of functions. But really, like the crazier things are, and the more somebody says this is, you're never going to fix this. That's where I'm like, oh, all right, now I'm definitely in, right?
Yeah, like hold my beer.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what's a good example of something that's so chaotic that somebody's like, you won't be able to fix it?
Everybody's got their kind of version, of this. And interestingly enough, while I didn't seek them out, almost everything I've done was in that mix. It was, two companies coming together and, multiple teams and multiple products and things like that. So even what's on the resume, has, a lot of that. And interestingly, like Unifier wasn't chaotic exactly, and they weren't a startup, but they definitely had hit a wall and needed to break through, and they're continuing to do that. But I think anything that is a startup, talking to two companies right now, and they're founder led, engineering and product led. They've got really interesting great solutions, but like anything in that stage, it's the same three people solving every single problem. And that's a really tough transition to make, because of what I said earlier. You're going to hire somebody, you're going to pay them too much, you're going to put them on the cap table. You don't even know what you need, right? You don't know what you want. How do you even evaluate bringing somebody on? And so, it may not be chaos like, to the extreme, but you are hitting a wall, and you do need to bring somebody in to kind of help polish it. Early adopters will resonate with a product led sales pitch, right? Because they're doing a little bit of the work for you. They're like, oh, I get it, I see it. That's why they're early adopters. And once you kind of hit the wall beyond that, you really need to bring in a thoughtful, purposeful, kind of go to market element to align and amplify what you're already doing so well. And so it gives me the opportunity to talk to companies that I think are, super cool, actually.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so many really awesome companies in the startup space that you're just hoping that they can get their chance.
Yeah. I'm working with a company, and they've got an AI solution that is, kind of, it's purpose built at a revenue operator, right? So whether you're RevOps or, whether you're a CRO, and the challenge with AI oftentimes is There's no context to it. It's not really pointed at anything in particular. And if you're not ready for it, it's just amplifying noise, right? It's not really doing what you need to, what you need to do. So this company called ProShort, and they took that AI stuff and they pointed it right at RevOps, right at a CRO, helping them train and understand their business and understand their deals, really putting context around it. And it's fun to be able to interact and see some of that. I couldn't create something in the way that they do. So the brilliance that the engineering teams, bring to that is incredible. And it's fun to be near. It even better when you can say, hey, look, let's match that goodness with this other goodness and make something pretty special. And I think that's one of the advantages of it.
Awesome. I wanted to ask you about, we talked a lot about the barriers to success for, maybe startups or in that $25 million range. I know you worked at Viptela before their acquisition with Cisco. What were the barriers to success when the company is at a much higher valuations, like 50 million, 500 million plus?
So, we talked earlier about, at different stages, like, what the playbook might be, whether you're, pure CRO or you're building a channel, what you might do and what's important at different stages, could be different. For Viptela specifically, and it's a great example and still one of the times I had the most fun. One, because it was a startup and it was crazy. And it's venture backed and you've got these Silicon Valley, VCs. So the pressure is really, really high. A lot of A players, really good technology. So very, very exciting. What was really important, and I'll just say it, really, really plainly, we needed to look bigger than we were, right? So we were going head to head with Cisco. Now, in the back of everybody's mind, I'm sure they're thinking, well, Cisco's a great, company to buy us eventually, but you still have to prove your worth in the process. And so you're selling a software version of the hardware that Cisco was selling. That's essentially the easiest way to think about it. So disruptive, right? A lot of Cisco people were at this company. And so the job really was, we need to look bigger, right? If we're going to go head to head with an enterprise, customer, and they might be comparing Cisco and us, we can't look really, really small. And having a channel, is a great way to be able to help you, be bigger, and certainly appear bigger. So having international footprint, you can't do with sales reps, but you can do with distributors and you can do with different partners and anchoring those. And so the goal at the time was very much that. And I think one of the reasons why it worked is because the expectations were dead on. So had the company thought, Anthony, go out and bring me 30 partners that all bring, 50 deals that they sell on their own. Like, even as I say that, you can immediately go, well, that's just not possible, right? That takes a lot of time. Most partners don't want to sell something that's unproven. So you have to do a lot of the work. So the expectations being what they were was incredibly important. The CRO at the time knew channel. He just knew it. He knew this was the way to be able to do it. But he also had a realistic view that in the beginning, what you want is just access to customers, right? Like, if that's the lowest bar, you want to be able to, push your solution out there, establish it as something that's real. But the expectation on the partner is not that the next day they're going to go and sell for you, right? And so having that alignment and that shared understanding at an executive level is incredibly important. It also happened to be a really, really great technology that was getting a lot of hype. It was SD-WAN. And so it was, at the time it was getting a lot of Gartner, press and things like that. So everything was kind of falling into place. So really building out some of those partnerships and distributors and, helped us have a global footprint, helped us. It's almost as basic as an RFP, right? If somebody puts out an RFP, if we can't check some of the boxes that a Cisco can, we almost don't even make it to the next thing. So it's a little bit of trench warfare versus, drone strikes and stuff like that. It's very, very much, and quite frankly, that's where I feel most comfortable is in the trenches. And so you're really kind of battling, but not trying to do too much is really important.
Yeah. What are some of the things that worked really well in the beginning startup stages that started to break once you started scaling more and you had more partners and more stress on the system?
So what really worked in the beginning, just like any other kind of sales team, once you find a few partners, and we all kind of brought relationships to the mix, right? So some said there was a lot of things that kind of came together that made this, an incredible success. But you're kind of going to battle with a few, folks. And so as you're doing that, you can only see so many customers. So you'd find a few partners, you'd work really closely, you'd build everything around them, and you really co-sell. It wasn't a big program. There wasn't a system in place or anything like that. It was just, you and I know each other. You know that customer. Can you get me in? And do you trust me enough that I'm not going to, screw up your customer relationship? And I think, that works for a time. And you've got, and this is common among most companies, you've got some sales heroes. You've got some really, really good salespeople. And they've got relationships and they can go make that successful. And then once the partner sees that it's successful, they'll do it again. But obviously, heroics don't get you, as far as you really want to go. I'll never truly know where we would have really hit a wall because we were acquired, right? So but we clearly impacted the market enough. We got into the right accounts. We beat a behemoth, not all the time, but enough, right, that they took notice. We established a global footprint through the distributors and it's just a ground game. It's just pure hustle. And what I'd say is that, had that Viptela stayed Viptela for another 5 or 10 years, we would have hit a wall and we would have had to systematically adapt and stop relying on 5 heroes to kind of do the work. Sooner or later you document and you've got to build those systems and expand your marketing and develop your channel even further. But in that case, we did the job that we set out to do, and that was make an impact, stand out, have a global footprint, look bigger than we were. It was a sub 20 million ARR, kind of company. And you could see from that exit, the value that somebody like a Cisco placed on it.
That's awesome. Did you hit that wall with Cato Networks? Because I know they grew to a $1 billion valuation.
Yeah. So Cato is a good example of, well, for me personally, you want to do it again. Right. I did stay at Cisco for, I think it was 3 years, and that was kind of part of the overall transition. And you continue to do some of those things and you learn a whole new environment, a very large environment at that. And whether you like it or not, you're learning, and it's a great company. And it was too big for me, but I wanted to do it again. So Cato was a really great opportunity. What's unique about Cato is its founder was one of the founders of Checkpoint. The management team that started it came from the channel. So, they knew it was part of them from the get-go. Maybe they needed some help executing, but at the very least, they knew this was their go-to-market. They weren't fighting it. They were, but they still had some of those trends of inadvertent conflict, right? To somebody, it makes sense. Well, my rep sold it. He's going to make, this much. The partner rep sold it. She's not going to make as much. because, we still had to help them. So there was a lot of that kind of selfish, stuff that takes a long time, I think, to kind of work its way out. It's nobody being bad. It's just, kind of makes sense. It's almost logical, but you have to break through some of that to kind of get the goodness. So they started off really, really strong. What was unique about Cato was they had a new-ish channel. Prior to say, 2020, it was a lot of resellers and kind of large, consulting firms and things like that. What was really taking shape was a channel around referral agents. And it operated differently. But that's why one of the reasons why I took the role. One, the company was based in Tel Aviv, and there was a lot of good technology coming out of Tel Aviv. And, I wanted the challenge of kind of working with a company who was based somewhere else. You have to learn new culture, new norms and stuff like that. That's a challenge. And then the second piece was the channel itself was made up of a different type of partner. And I thought, okay, that's a fun challenge. I'd like to learn about that. And I could see that was becoming more prevalent with software as a service. And so that was super fun. And just a reminder that you got to challenge yourself all the time, right? Continuous learning, you can keep doing that stuff, but boy, you throw yourself into the fire and you learn really quick, what's necessary. So that's why I took that role.
Awesome. Well, I don't want to go too much over in time, so I just have one question left for you. What has been your favorite play or success story from any role in the past, including what you're doing today, either because it was interesting or fun or a big win or like an unlikely success?
We talked about Viptela, and I have to go back to that. Cato was phenomenal in the sense that, that was a, say 30 million to 100 million, and they're way past that now. Like they just continue to grow and it's just incredible. And it's not even surprising. But Viptela was just the perfect. It was folks that I knew. We got along. I'll speak to them, not so much me, but real A players, really good VC company behind them, a lot of experience, but just hustlers. We worked so hard. It was so chaotic. But we had so much fun. And I think in the middle of it, there were times where I was just like, all right, this is starting to break me. You push through it, but there are moments. Everybody's got those. I had no idea. I mean, you talked about the exit. I mean, the acquisition, was pretty gigantic. And I think, for all of us, I mean, there's a lot of luck, but even if that hadn't been the case, it still was so much fun because it was a challenge. We didn't know everything. We had to figure a bunch of stuff out. But everybody contributed, from the engineering team to sales to marketing. And it was just a lot of folks that just kind of, just trench warfare, you know what I mean? There was no strategy, but really, really good people, knew their customers, knew how to sell. It was just a lot of fun. We had so much fun. And so, that plus what was an incredible exit, and that also led to spending time at Cisco. I'd spent my entire career up until that point competing against Cisco. So network security, networking, companies like that, they were always the big person on the block. And it's very strange to get acquired by the company you spent your whole life kind of fighting against.
Yeah, I bet.
But it was just a lot of fun. And just because a lot of things had to come together.
Awesome. That is so cool. Well, this has been an amazing crash course in channel sales and that entire world that I previously knew nothing about. So this is super exciting.
That's great. Yeah, no, it is. I think the more you talk to CROs, the more you'll see just how much, how important that part of the go-to-market really is.
Mm-hmm. And so, Anthony, where can people find you if they want to learn more about what you do or Channel 360?
Absolutely. So certainly on LinkedIn, you'll find me there. You can come to the website. We've got channel360.ai. You can always find us there. And again, I try to spend a lot of time, helping companies through the business, but also kind of individuals. If you're kind of a channel manager, or you're kind of a new leader within the channel space, or a new revenue leader, I just like having these conversations. So, please feel free to reach out.
Awesome. And we'll have those links in the show notes as well. Thank you so much, Anthony.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Thanks for listening to the episode. If this resonated, please give us a 5-star rating and a follow. It helps us reach more people, and you get our latest and greatest content without having to search for it. And if you're looking for hands-on help in go-to-market strategy and/or RevOps, please reach out to us. We help our clients with everything from annual planning to improving processes in go-to-market, implementing systems to support those processes, and go-to-market AI. We're always happy to offer a free consultation to help you identify the best opportunities to improve your go-to-market engine with or without our help. You can find us at unionsquareconsulting.com, and the info will be in our show notes.